Welcome to Voices in Mystery. I'm your host, Nancy Carlson. Our first guest today is Beverle Graves Myers. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Nancy.
Beverly's from the Louisville area and has the Tito Amato mystery series. And Tito's an opera singer. Tell us a little bit about your protagonist.
That's right. He is one of the stars of the stage in the early days of opera. He's a castrato soprano, one of the boys who was castrated as a young 8 or 9-year-old to have the lovely voice. Think Vienna Boys Choir, but much more powerful. So he's in this fourth novel, he has become a full-fledged star in 18th century Venice, but he also has a big talent for sleuthing.
Is his speaking voice as high as his singing voice?
He would have more of a womanish speaking voice to our ear, yes.
Why did you decide to have him a castrato soprano?
I had the idea when I read Anne Rice's book, Cry to Heaven. This was pre-Anne Rice's vampire books. And she wrote this sprawling, romantic, historical novel about the castrati. That took me back to my college days when I first fell in love with opera. And I remember hearing the voices of men who trained their falsetto voice to sing that same repertoire. Just thought they were beautiful. And I thought I could use this as a very unique mystery character.
I'd say
He's got issues.
It's the only one I've heard of. So you knew opera because you're an opera fan, but your readers don't need to know that much about opera, right? Because it's also detective fiction or sleuth fiction.
That's right. Tito gets all over Venice. He's a born and bred Venetian, so he is all over the island. He has a lot of family that tie into the mysteries. He has a brother who's a merchant sailor and 2 sisters, one who's a lovely, sweet homebody and the other a wild thing. And she figures heavily in The Iron Tongue of Midnight, the latest book. She's a singer as well. And I try to hit all levels of Venetian society, from the man who sweeps up the pigeon poop on the piazza to the doge and the noblemen's. And that's one reason I chose an opera singer of the time. They were so, opera was the entertainment of the day, and the singers were so wealthy and famous. It was like a rock stars of today. They had an entree to anywhere they wanted to go and could mix freely with everyone.
Now you're a retired psychiatrist, so do you have psychiatry in your books?
I do. I've used my background by including a character with what we would call a mental illness in each book. One book had a lady, elderly lady, who had what we would call Alzheimer's disease. And Tito's sister, the wild one, has Tourette's syndrome. They, of course, have no idea what's wrong with her. And from earliest childhood, they were mystified by her fits and her cursing. And even had in the first book, they have a priest in to do an exorcism, which, of course, is a woeful failure. So, yeah, every book has some issue through a character that they deal with in their 18th century understanding.
When you write a series, is it necessary to start at the first book and read through in order, or do your books catch up the reader in case it's the first one they've ever picked up?
My editor makes sure I catch people up, and that's very difficult to give that information without giving away the plots to books that the readers might not have read. So that is one of the great difficulties, but you don't have to read mine in order, but I have the sort of series where Tito has a lot of friends, associates at the theater, his family. It's more fun if you get to know these people from the beginning.
How has Tito changed as you've progressed from one book to another?
He's matured a great deal. He started as a very young man, 19, 20 years old, coming back to Venice from his music conservatory in Naples, not sure how he would be accepted because he had never performed in public on the stage. He'd only performed at his school. Not sure he even wanted the career that had really been thrust upon him without his permission. And when we come to the Iron Tongue of Midnight, the fourth book, he's a much a more seasoned performer, much more confident about his ability, has learned a lot more about life, and has more insights into why people do what they do.
Now, what's that title, The Iron Tongue of Midnight? What does that refer to?
That's from a Shakespeare quote. I'm not so good at doing my own titles, so I get out Bartlett's quotations and go to the masters. All the murders take place at midnight. This is my homage to the traditional country house mystery, but instead of being an isolated manor on the moors of England, it's transposed to the Italian countryside. And one of the plot hooks is that all the murders take place at midnight, hence the Iron Tongue of Midnight. And the murder weapons all involve something from the clock. The first victim is killed with the pendulum of the clock, the big brass disc bashed over the head. And another victim is stabbed with a clock hand, one of the iron clock hands.
That sounds good. Have you been to Venice, or do you even need to go to Venice in order to write about it?
I started the series never having been there. I had to rely on other people's eyes and ears to help me along. Luckily, there's lots of artwork from the period and lots of memoirs and biographies from people who actually lived it. But my husband and I did make a trip last year, and it was the trip of a lifetime, as you can imagine, just being in Venice. Plus, I knew the city so well from studying the old maps and current maps. Venice hasn't changed that much. So I was just constantly taking pictures, writing down notes, little things. The big things I knew, but little things, ivy growing out of a drain spout, or the little canary birds that so many people have hanging in their windows, things that people maybe don't mention, but little touches that I plan to use.
Do you speak Italian?
I took a course before we went. I know enough to get along, but don't ask me to.
But you
spout any.
you couldn't do research in Italian, so you needed helpers or translators or librarians.
I could only, because unfortunately publishers don't give us that much time these days, I could only use sources that had already been translated.
Ah, what do you mean? Are you on a tight schedule when you write a book?
Well, a book a year.
Wow.
And you have to get out there and promote it too once it's written. So these books get written in about 7 months, which when you're doing a historical or something that's in another place, out of your everyday comfort zone, takes a long time to do the research. And readers know there are always people out there. If you say somebody used a sulfur match in 1740, they'll write you an email and say, no, those weren't invented till 1765. I'm sorry.
They keep you honest,
They
don't
do. They do. I have to look up everything.
It has been such a pleasure having you on Voices in Mystery, and we hope you'll come back often. We've been visiting with Beverle Graves Meyer, the author of The Iron Tongue of Midnight, which is one of the Tito Amato mysteries, and we thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Nancy.